as a family where you come upon hard times and you start to wonder, where is the next meal going to come from? How am I going to pay for everything towards the end of the month? And if you've ever been in that situation, I imagine in this room, probably we've all been in that situation at some point, then this is a very pertinent story for us. Because it starts off with a famine. And there is a family wondering, how are we going to survive? How are we going to stay alive in the future? How are we going to eat? How are we going to put food on the table for our children? And so they are faced with a dilemma. Do they stay in the promised land that God has given their people? Or do they take their chances and go to a neighbouring country? And one of the things that we have to get used to in the book of Ruth is that the narrator leaves out a lot of information. The book is quite short. Imagine if we had all the information that the characters at the time had. It would be quite a long book, wouldn't it? For instance, we don't know the cause of the famine. It could be weather, couldn't it? That's the thing that kind of jumps into our mind straight away. But it could be enemy forces have come in, destroyed all the crops, burnt all the crops, and there's just no food. So we don't know those things. We don't know what the kind of long-term prospect is. We don't know whether this family were negligent and didn't save up. We don't know if they lived a really lavish lifestyle. We don't know any of those bits of information. But what we do know is there was a famine, they weren't sure how they were going to survive, and they had to make a decision to stay alive. And I wonder, if we put ourselves into that story, what would we do if it was us? How would we respond if it was our family? Another thing that we need to consider is that this is the time of the judges. And if you're faced with, and if you know anything about the book of Judges, it's a pretty barbaric book. And it's deliberately so. It's to show how far off God's people have wandered from what he wanted them to be. It shows that they have actually become worse than the nations around them, which is something for us to consider as this family are going, well, do we stay here in God's promised land, which is worse than it is in neighbouring countries, perhaps like Moab? And so that kind of has to factor into our thinking as well. So whatever our assessment is going to be of this family, we should be generous. We should be generous. We shouldn't judge them too harshly. As far as I'm aware, they didn't break any Old Testament law. They didn't break any of God's commands. I think there were some really grey areas that are kind of brought up in here. But I don't think they did. And if you know different, then come and show me afterwards, because it could be that I'm wrong. My gut feeling is they probably should have stayed where they were. Probably. But it may only be neutral that they left, if that makes any sense. And the text implies that they intended to return. They were going to go, and when it was kind of good to come back, they were going to come back. That seems to be their intent. Right, we're going to apply a second coat of paint to Rachel's reading. So during the time of Judges, there was a famine in the land. A man left Bethlehem in Judah with his wife and 2 sons to stay in the territory of Moab for a while. The man's name was Elimelech and his wife's name was Naomi. The names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. And they entered the fields of Moab and settled there. And straight away, we're told the names of these people. And it kind of doesn't really mean anything to us. So Elimelech means God is my king. Naomi means pleasant. Mahlon means sickness. And Chilion means mortality. So maybe not the baby names that we would choose, I don't know. Maybe, I'm not sure. And one study Bible that I read made this observation. That Elimelech, God is my king, acts as his own king and decides that he's going to decide where he's going to live and his family are going to live. Naomi's name, Pleasant, is kind of reminded this person Psalm 16 verse 6 that says, "The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance." And this commentator said, well, isn't it interesting? You've got someone acting as their own king. You've got this name which kind of reminds them of this verse about boundary lines and pleasant places, and a family that have gone, I don't think our boundary lines are quite in the right place. We're going to move somewhere else. And I thought that was a really interesting observation, and maybe that is something that we miss when we think of when the meaning of the names is given. Something that, because we don't know how they translate, automatically is something that is lost on us, but maybe the original readers would have had that kind of thought in their mind. And so, as we thought, they didn't intend to stay in Moab for a particularly long time, just until it was safe. And maybe they stayed there longer than they intended, maybe they put down deeper roots than they originally planned. However, the narrator doesn't openly criticise them. And maybe that means that we shouldn't either. So carrying on, verse 3. Naomi's husband, Elimelech, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. Her sons took Moabite women as their wives. One was named Orpah, and the second was named Ruth. After they lived in Moab about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and the woman was left without her 2 children and without her husband. She and her daughters-in-law set out to return from the territory of Moab, because she heard in Moab that the Lord had paid attention to his people's need by providing them food. She left the place where she had been living, accompanied by her 2 daughters-in-law, and travelled along the road leading back to the land of Judah. So they make this big move. They leave their family, their friends behind. They go to a country that they probably didn't know and just set up, which is a pretty brave thing to do. And then disaster strikes, and Naomi's husband dies. And again, we're not told any of the circumstances around it, but clearly that is a tragedy for anybody. And so she then has to deal with this. Now what are we going to do? We've made this move, my husband has died, there's going to be some economic impact on the household there. And so she has to deal with this. And then we come to another grey area. Her sons took Moabite wives. Now, should they have done this? Again, we don't. The narrator of the story makes no direct comment. It wasn't explicitly forbidden in Old Testament law, but it would have probably been contentious. Not least for the following reasons. In Genesis 19, the origins of Moab are given to the people. And the origins of Moab are not great. They come from an incestuous relationship where the daughters intentionally get their father drunk so that they can get pregnant by him. That's their intention. And that is the origin story of this people. The child that resulted of that union then becomes the sort of patriarch of this people. So it's not a great backstory for a nation. In Deuteronomy, there's more commentary on Moab, and it says this: God gave the following command: "No Amorite or Moabite may enter the Lord's assembly. None of their descendants, even to the 10th generation, may ever enter the Lord's assembly. This is because they did not meet you with food and water on the journey after you came out of Egypt, and because Balaam, son of Beor, from Pethor in Aram Naharaim, was hired to curse you." So there's not, and this didn't mean that they weren't allowed to join the people, but it did mean that they were restricted in the formal worship of the people. So again, there's nothing excluding these men taking Moabite wives, but it would have been contentious. It would have been something that, if you were a mother, you probably wouldn't want your sons to go and marry 2 Moabite women. You'd think, can't you pick someone? Just not them. It would look better. The neighbours won't talk. It would be that kind of situation. And certainly that idea of the neighbours talking certainly comes in later in chapter 1. So it's a grey area. It's nothing wrong necessarily. Certainly culturally uncomfortable for Naomi, I would have thought. On the other hand, and I think we should be fair here, both of these women are portrayed very, very well in this narrative. Both women, Orpah and Naomi, come across excellently. So, we don't know, and we just trying to read in between the lines the big gaps that the narrator's left out. So we don't know, but these kind of things are kind of going on in the background. And then disaster strikes again. Both of Naomi's sons die, and she is left without her sons and her husband, and her daughters-in-law are left without their husbands. And this would have had a significant economic impact on this family in an ancient world setup. And so Naomi's in a foreign land, she's got these two daughters-in-law, which she may or may not be thrilled about having, and they've got mouths to feed, and they're kind of almost back at the start of the story again, aren't they? She and her husband and her family left Israel to have greater security financially, put food on the table, and they end up in a situation that is worse. She doesn't have her family, and they are economically still uncertain. There's still that question of how are we going to put food on the table? And last week, Adrian pointed out that Ruth has similarities to the book of Job. And you can certainly start to see that, can't you, in this chapter? Job, of course, that book where everything pretty much is taken away from him. His wealth, his children die, his reputation is in tatters. And Ruth is kind of in that place too. She's lost everything. Her reputation is in tatters. What's she going to do? Another thing that I think we can consider is how much agency has Naomi actually had in this story? How much agency she actually had? And this jumped out at me in verse 1. Chapter 1, verse 1, during the time of the judges, there was a famine in the land. A man left Bethlehem. A man left Bethlehem. So maybe she didn't even have much say in this decision. We don't know that. Again, this is something the text is silent on, but maybe this is a little hint. Maybe this wasn't even her decision to leave. Everything that we read about Naomi suggests that she is a faithful, God-fearing Israelite. I think that's one of the things that we can be fairly sure on as we read this book. Maybe this wasn't her choice. Then later it says, her sons took Moabite women as their wives. Now, whatever the cultural difficulties would have been, this is certainly putting roots down, isn't it? So what was a temporary stop-off automatically becomes, we're then putting down roots when we're going to stay a little bit longer. And again, maybe she didn't have much say in that decision. I don't know, we don't know. Again, the text is silent. But maybe she didn't. So the question is there of how much agency does Naomi actually have up until this point? We don't know, but it's worth considering. What we do know is that when we can be sure that she has agency, when she is able to make a decision for herself, the first thing that she does is go back home. That's the first decision that we know she has made, for sure. She decides to return to Israel. And in verse 8, it says this, Naomi said to them, each of you go back to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you have shown to the dead and to me. May the Lord grant each of you rest in the house of a new husband. She kissed them and wept loudly. They said to her, we insist on returning with you and to your people. But Naomi replied, return home, my daughters. Why do you want to go with me? Am I able to have more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters, go on, for I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me to have a husband tonight and to bear sons, would you be willing to wait for them to grow up? Would you restrain yourselves from remarrying? No, my daughters. My life is much too bitter for you to share, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. Again they wept loudly, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Naomi said, look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Follow your sister-in-law. But Ruth replied, don't plead with me to abandon you, or to return and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you live, I will live, and your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me, and do so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped talking to her. And I think by that it means she stopped trying to reason with her, not just gave her the cold shoulder. So Naomi looks at this situation for this group of people that clearly have love and affection for each other, and says, look guys, you can't throw your lot in with me. God himself has turned his hand against me. In other words, I'm cursed. It's obvious. Wherever I go, the only thing that follows me is death and financial uncertainty. Don't put your lot in with me. Don't do that to yourselves. You don't need to do it. You can still go back. You can remarry in your own country for your own good. Please do that. And I don't think Orpah should be criticised for turning back. It's the obvious thing to do, isn't it? It's the sensible thing to do. Although I do think she misses out. I do think she misses out. And it's just a passing thought. But it's interesting, isn't it? There are at least 2 kinsman redeemers later on in the story. And who knows what would have happened if she had chosen to do what Ruth did and follow Naomi home. So not much criticism for Orpah, but she does turn home and she does go back. But Ruth displays an incredible love to Naomi. An incredible love. A familial bond that is almost, it's rare, isn't it? Even between blood relatives, but for a daughter-in-law and a mother-in-law is just incredible. To commit yourself when you just don't, when the future looks that bleak, when the future looks that dark, when there's no real hope. And she says, look, I'm going to be here with you no matter what happens. I'm going to be here. I'm going to, if the worst happens, I will be there with you. And not just until you die, but she makes that commitment, I'm going to be buried with you. So if the natural order of things occurs, and you as the older person die before me, I'm still not going. I'm staying. And I will be buried in the family plot with you. That is an incredible statement of love. Incredible. What a display. And not only is it that, but if we notice in verse 17, and you may notice if you have your Bibles open, when Ruth swears at the end of her oath, it says, may the Lord, in capitals. And if you know how Bible translators translate the personal name of God, Yahweh, that's how they do it. They use the capitalized Lord to distinguish between just the Lord without capitals, as in the title. And so here she doesn't just say, may your gods hold me accountable. She says, may Yahweh hold me accountable. She uses the personal name of Naomi's God. And I think that implies there is some faith there. So this isn't just a statement of incredible love. I think this is a statement of faith. I think Ruth at least has a seedling of faith, if not more, in the God of Israel, in Yahweh. And doesn't that say something about Naomi's witness? For this 10 years or so that they've been living in the land of Moab, we don't know how long the kind of marriage between the sons lasted for, how long she knew, how long Naomi and Ruth had a kind of mother-in-law, daughter-in-law relationship, or knew each other before that. But there was something in Naomi's witness that both women wanted to follow her. And Ruth at least seems to have a personal identification that Yahweh is her God. And that's something for us to consider. Through all the difficulties that Naomi has been through all the dark times that she has been through, and through all the things that she's about to say, her witness still shines brightly. In verse 19, the two of them travelled until they came to Bethlehem. When they entered Bethlehem, the whole town was excited about their arrival, and the local women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara," she answered, "for the Almighty has made me very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has opposed me and the Almighty has afflicted me?" So Naomi came back from the territory of Moab with her daughter-in-law, Ruth, the Moabitess. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. And again, there's that play on words, isn't there, with the meaning of the name. Don't call me Naomi, don't call me pleasant, because I am actually bitter. Because God has turned his hand against me. And we've noted the similarities with the book of Job. But one of the differences with the book of Job is that we don't get God's commentary. In the book of Job, there's a commentary, isn't there, where God and Satan are having a conversation, and God kind of reveals what he's going to do. And at the end of the book, we get God's summation. We get God's verdict on what's happened. But in Ruth, we don't get that. What does God think of these grey areas that we've been thinking about? What does God think about them going to Moab? What does God think about them doing something culturally dubious and taking or marrying from outside of Israel? We don't know. He never says. Are Naomi's circumstances judgment from God? Well, she thinks so. She thinks so. The townspeople probably think so. And the translation I read from it kind of says they were excited. Another translation says the town buzzed. The town murmured. And you can hear it, can't you? You can imagine it. Oh, look who's back. Look who went away. And oh dear, she's come back without her husband, without her sons. Oh, she's got a Moabitess daughter-in-law. Interesting. Oh, you can see it, can't you? You can see how that kind of would maybe play out in our culture with different issues, with a knowing nod and a yeah. And so the townspeople probably think that she's been judged. Certainly the writings from, they're called midrashes, seem to back that they kind of interpret their commentaries written closer to the time of the Old Testament books. And they certainly seem to think that God has judged Naomi. Not that I've read them, but other people have written. So they certainly seem to think that. And so that question is kind of hanging over chapter 1. And it ends just by saying, introducing the next section, doesn't it? And it was the beginning of barley harvest. Okay, so what do we do with this text? How does it impact you? How does it impact me? Tomorrow, next week, next month? Well, I want us to consider that circumstances do not automatically display God's pleasure or displeasure. Circumstances do not automatically display God's pleasure or displeasure. Sometimes God acts in judgment. It's not popular today. We like to think he doesn't, but it's clear from Scripture that he does. The famine itself is probably God's judgment, because in the books of Deuteronomy, God says, if you start to go awry, here are some of the things that I'm going to do to show that you're going awry. One of them's famine. So that probably is God's judgment. I don't think God is judging Naomi here. I don't think so. And one of the reasons I think that is because I think when God judges, he tells us. Because he's not cruel. If we're going awry, if we're making mistakes, God doesn't just leave it up to us to guess. He'll tell us. He wants to correct us. He's not just waiting there with a big stick going, I'm not going to tell you the rules, but when you break them, bam! I've got you. So there's no explicit word from God that he's judging. And I think when we see, even in the New Testament, was it Ananias and Sapphira, when they're struck dead, it's clear God's judging them. It's a shocking story in Acts, but it's clear that God is acting in judgment, and he tells them, the church know. So there's none of that here, so I don't think that's going on. So what is it? Well, sometimes there are natural consequences, aren't there? If I choose not to stay fit, not to exercise, which I don't really do, so maybe I need to bear this in mind, there are going to be consequences of that down the line, right? There are going to be body changes that I might not like. There might be health issues that then come along because I haven't looked after myself. Yeah, those are natural consequences. Just because I'm a Christian doesn't mean that God's going to go, well, don't worry about it, eat what you like, do whatever, don't exercise, and I'll just, you'll just stay healthy and fit, and whatever. That's not going to happen. There are natural consequences to things. I also don't necessarily think that's happening. Sometimes life is just life, isn't it? Life in a fallen world for Christians is very similar to life in a fallen world for everybody else. Good people get sick. Bad things happen to good people. Bad things happen to Christians. And that is life in a fallen world. That is life in a fallen world for us. That's life in a fallen world for Naomi. So just because we might feel like we're being judged, just because other people might be chattering and gossiping and saying, hey, God's judging them, just because it's the consensus view, it doesn't mean that that is true. Our circumstances do not automatically display God's pleasure or displeasure. And that's true in the reverse. Just when everything's going well and, everything is good, doesn't mean that God's happy with us either. So circumstance is not the thing that we want to look at for God's pleasure or displeasure. That's not true in the book of Job. And Jesus says this in John chapter 9. As he and his disciples were passing by, he saw a man born blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Similar kind of question, isn't it? Who screwed up so that God meted out some judgment and caused this person to be born blind? And Jesus said, neither this man nor his parents sinned. This came about so that God's word might be displayed in him. Jesus says, you're missing the point. This isn't about, this circumstance isn't about judgment or my pleasure or displeasure. This is so that I might work through it. And I think that's a really important lesson for us about circumstances. In a fallen world, bad things happen to good people. In a fallen world, bad things happen to Christians. The hope for Christians is this, that God's work is being displayed through our circumstances. That's the hope for Christians that non-Christians don't have, is that God is working through that circumstance for his glory. Ultimately, for our good. Ultimately. And that brings us to the next point. Hindsight is 20/20. In the middle of this story, Naomi is unable to praise God. She's unable to. It's too painful. It's too difficult. But we will see later in the story she is able to do that. Hindsight is 20/20. And for us, that's got to be true too, right? When we're really in the middle of a difficult circumstance, we're going to go, how is God going to use this? What is he doing? But the message we can take away is God sees, he cares, God loves you, and God is working in and through you. That's the takeaway. I think we can also be challenged by Naomi's witness. In the midst of hard times, in the midst of difficult times, she presents a witness that other people find attractive, that other people want to follow. And that's a challenge for me, and that's a challenge for you. How are we in the difficult times as Christians? Do we still present that witness that other people find attractive, or do they go, that Christianity that they had in the good times is gone? And that is a challenge. And lastly, we have the challenge of Ruth's love and Ruth's faith. If we loved each other as Ruth loved Naomi, that would be an incredibly powerful witness to everyone or anyone who is watching. And if we have that kind of unabandoned faith that Ruth has, that no matter what happens, she's jumped in with both feet, right? There's no holding on to the side. She's just, I am just in. I'm fully committed to Yahweh. I'm fully committed to everything that He's got. I'm just going to go for it. If we had that kind of faith, I also think that would be a massive witness to the world around about us. Let's pray.